All right. So welcome to Out of the Woods webinar. Today we've got Dr. Catherine Belisle. She's a food scientist at Cornell Maple program. Her research focus is to improve staple maple confections, develop new value-added foods and beverages, and mitigate issues leading to off-flavored syrups. She enjoys helping maple producers troubleshoot recipes and expand their businesses to safely create and sell value-added products. All recipes and guidelines developed by the Cornell Maple program can be found on Cornell Maple's website, cornellmaple.com. Today, she's going to have a talk called How to Use Maple, and Catherine will break down maple syrup into science and discuss various maple foods and beverages that can be created and sold. So with that, I'm going to let you take it away, Dr. Belisle.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm glad that you can be here tonight. I'm just going to share my presentation really quick. Let's see. Can you guys see the presentation?
They should be able to see it. They can't.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Awesome. So, as is already mentioned, my talk is going to be about how to use maple. I know you guys all have quite a bit of work going on just to be able to get the syrup. So once you get to that point, what can you do with it outside of using it as syrup? Or even if you don't want to boil all of your sap into syrup, there are things that you can do with that sap that are considered value-added products that you can sell for a good price and make a good return on that. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to discuss today, and please feel free to ask questions along the way if you have any. I usually forget to look at the chat, so if you don't mind like raising the hand or however, that would be good. So 4 main topics for today. Looking at sap and syrup, it's really important to know what is in sap and syrup in order to make confections or any other value-added products out of those commodities. And then we'll go into traditional confections. I'll cover this for honestly the majority of the presentation. And that's because I think traditional confections are a little bit finicky. People who have been working with traditional confections for years, I know are absolutely perfect. They have their technique, but in case people are interested, there's a lot of science behind those techniques. And if you're struggling at all, then hopefully some of this information will be helpful for you so that you can improve whatever you might be struggling with. And then we're gonna just look at a couple maple beverages and maple confections in case you want to go into that area. And if you do, you can also reach out to me with any specific questions and I will help you with that whole process. So to get started on sap and syrup. So maple sap, of course, we all know it's mostly water and it's mostly sucrose or table sugar. It can technically range from 1 to 5%, although I know at least here at the Arnott Forest, ours is about 1.7% sugar when it comes out of the trees. There is also minor amounts of invert sugar known as glucose and fructose, and these usually aren't whenever the sap comes out of the tree, but when the sap is flowing through those lines. I have a note here that yeast and bacteria will break that sucrose into the invert sugars. So this is particularly interesting for the end of the season when the temperatures are warmer and the microbes are more active. So sap also has organic acids, has proteins, especially in the later season. For buddy syrup, the off-flavored syrup at the end of the season, proteins are associated with that off flavor. But small amounts of protein are okay as long as they don't give off flavors. Minerals and antioxidants. So when we make syrup, of course, legally, if it contains, the syrup must be 66 to 68.9% bricks or percent sugar. In Vermont, that minimum density is actually 67 instead of 66. And then for quality, there's US grade A, which is it must have uniform color, good flavor, no off odors or cloudiness or sediment, and then it'll be labeled as golden, amber, dark, or very dark. I've been getting some calls recently about cloudiness and sediment in syrups. Sometimes when cloth filters are used, you can end up getting some of this cloudiness and sediment, or even if filtering isn't occurring at all. So just in case you're having that issue, I wanted to mention it because I've heard about that quite a bit lately. Now, if you happen to have any of these off flavors, any cloudiness, anything like that, it's known as processing grade. So this can also be the buddy syrup, the ropey syrup, any off flavors. We're currently doing research to give guidelines on what you can do with these syrups so that you don't have to throw them away. One of our research projects is focusing on buddy, especially making value-added confections. So that should be out by the end of this year. So please keep an eye on it, or keep an eye for it, out for it. Yeah. All right, so let's dive into the traditional confections. There are three main traditional confections that I want to discuss. We have cream, maple candy, and sugar. So first of all, why bother? Why go through all the extra work after you've already made all of your syrup to make these confections? Well, one, it's fun being in the kitchen all the time. And two, you get a good profit out of it. So according to the USDA, as of 2022, grade A table syrup sells for an average of $6.36 per half pint. So we're just going to put this as 1/2 pint, 8 fluid ounces. So that will make the conversions easier for each of these. So per 8 ounce or per half pint of syrup, you can end up making $8.48 to $12.96 worth of maple cream. So in other words, what you're normally selling that syrup for, you can make up to double the price. And 8 ounces of cream are shown in the picture in the middle. For candy, it goes for $8.88 up to $24 per 8 ounce. And that just depends really where you're selling it. You know, if you're selling it in a more touristy area, you can definitely go for that higher price. I think the lower price that I found was on Etsy for anybody who's selling on there. But just for a reference, 8 ounces of maple candy look like this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, times 4. So we have 24 pieces of candy. But you can also sell your broken candy. And I've only seen one person doing this so far, but I think it's a really great idea. And you can sell that for still more than what you actually sell the syrup for. And then lastly, sugar. You can sell it for about the same price as the syrup or double. So really great way to use maple, to sell maple, just kind of get those products out into the world more. Oh, I think this one is the 8 ounce container of sugar. So there are a lot of things that go into making these value-added products. Your time, there's shrinkage, additional labor that you may or may not have to pay for, depending if you're doing it or if you're hiring someone. Cost of packaging, the energy just for transportation, delivering your product, or if you're shipping it. Your initial investment, if you're getting any of the candy or cream machines, they are very useful, but they do cost a little bit of money. So even after accounting for these costs, the profit margin is still commonly much higher making these 3 traditional confections than it is for syrup. So there are a couple keys to make profitable confections, and that's having an efficient production and having consistent quality. So that's where I'm here to help. So there are quite a few things to know about confections. First of all, syrup quality and grade. We've already covered that. So you know you have to have good quality syrup. And the grade, that's really a personal preference on whether you like those lighter vanilla flavors that are found in golden and amber, or if you like those nice caramel flavors that are found in dark and very dark. So we've already covered this. You already have great syrup. The next step, understanding invert sugars and testing syrup. So invert sugars, we've mentioned previously, it's the sucrose, which is actually a disaccharide. So it's bound together And then what happens is it just splits apart. So this can be from heat, this can be from bacteria, can also be from the enzyme invertase, which I don't believe Vermont residents are able to use. So the other option, I think it's tartaric acid that you can use to invert your sugars or split apart your sugars. So you have glucose and fructose. And it's really important to understand these sugars because when it's no longer sucrose, they act completely differently. We're also going to look at the science of saturation and crystallization. How does crystallization occur? Why cooking temperature matters. Why do you go to 234 if you're going to make one of the particular confections, or 262 for sugar? Why do those temperatures matter? How does stirring temperature and speed impact those confections? And then we'll take a look at all of these values for your cream, candy, and sugar. And I can provide this presentation to you guys afterwards so you have those notes. So first, syrup quality and grading. So we'd already talked about this a bit, but I do want to go into some of the off flavors that you can detect. So spoiled sap, meaning that the sap was boiled, the sap was spoiled, there was too many microbes in the sap that were active and declining that quality of the sap before it was boiled. So you're going to end up with that sour flavor once you get the syrup. You can fix this by just tasting your syrup before it's boiled. Buddy, you get a Tootsie Roll to cabbage flavor. This one you can actually smell while it's boiling. Contaminants, bleach, detergents, paint. To avoid contaminants, our rule is to triple rinse everything. So if you're washing with a Dawn dish soap, rinse it off 3 times before you add any of your sap or syrup to it. Dirty filters, they can be musty or moldy. It's very important, especially with cloth filters, that you are boiling your cloth filters and make sure that they have no odor to them when you use them. Defoamers can sometimes have a greasy feeling on the teeth if too much is used. And then scorched, you get a smoky, charred flavor that can typically happen with when you're making sugars, or if your boiling pan is too hot, you can end up getting some scorched. So unfortunately, confections don't typically cover off flavors. And we have a Buddy maple syrup lexicon. So just a dictionary of all the different terms that are used to describe Buddy. And I know the text is small, I'm sorry about that. But some of the things that you can pick up in Buddy are dark chocolate, mocha, burnt sugar. I was tasting some Buddy syrup the other day that was cheesy and fishy. Not my favorite flavor. And there was also some sulfur flavors as well. So this is a good resource in case you are interested in really characterizing what those flavors are that you have. So we'll have this one up in the next 2 months. So understanding and measuring invert sugar levels is key to making quality confections. So we have a video available on our website and also available on YouTube. It's called Intro to Invert Sugar Testing. And so the biggest part of this is you're going to need we use AccuCheck, but you're going to need a diabetic meter. You're going to need water, a scale, and some syrup. And you only need about 1.5 teaspoons of syrup in order to measure the invert levels. And so typically invert levels will range from, I've seen as low as 0.4 up to 5.5 in your syrup, just through the production process of making syrup. Those are usually the ranges of what you'll get for invert levels. And then if you add the invertase or any other heat or whatnot in order to make more inverted syrup or more inverted sugars, you can actually invert all of the sugars that are in syrup. So you would have a 100% invert solution. So it's really important to measure invert because the color grade, or whether it's dark, very dark, golden, or amber, doesn't match the invert levels. So dark syrups can have lower invert levels, and light syrups can sometimes have high invert levels. I had an amber syrup last year that I thought was going to have 1 or 2% invert because you see the lighter syrup, you just think that it's going to have a lighter invert, but that's not the case. This syrup ended up having a 4.4% invert. So it's very important to measure. It takes less than 5 minutes to do. I would very much recommend doing this, especially for value-added confections. And the reason why is because you will get failed batches. I make quite a few confections to purposely fail. And so I test those invert levels to see what is the limit that I can get to. And there are quite a few failed batches. And that's just so sad to see after all that hard work. So another reason that invert sugars are important is that they really impact crystal formation. So when you have sucrose or table sugar, you can see those crystals. You buy it in the store, they're beautiful, they're stable. But when you're buying invert sugars, if you think of glucose or fructose, so for Caro syrup, for instance, is glucose. So if you're buying glucose, it's usually in a liquid form. That's actually because these invert sugars really attract a lot of moisture. So because they attract a lot of moisture, you end up with this soupy and separated cream if your invert level is too high, or your candy won't harden because there's just too much water in the candy. And your sugar actually won't crystallize. It'll end up looking like fudge. And while the flavors are still good in these candies and all these different confections, they're just not up to the quality that is considered ideal. Okay, just a little bit more on these invert sugars. So this is what the sucrose molecule looks like. And every single time that the sucrose molecule is broken up into the glucose and fructose, it's always cleaved at this oxygen. So, as I said earlier, there are multiple things that can break down this sucrose. Sucrase or invertase, the same exact enzyme. Acids such as lemon juice, yeast, and bacteria. If you're using the enzyme, it is very important to keep this refrigerated. Enzymes will become inactive if they aren't held in proper storage conditions. We just keep ours in the refrigerator. I've worked here for 1.5 years and we haven't had any problem with it. It'll probably last for 2 to 3 years without any issue. So just to give a kind of an idea of what these sugars actually look like under a microscope, is that you have sucrose and it's got these beautiful block structures, which is very nice because it's very stable, it crystallizes well. But because there's not a lot of surface area, a lot of that crystal or a lot of that sugar is actually inside of that crystal. So the surface area isn't showing everything. Because of that, we end up getting slightly less sweetness because we don't detect all of that on our tongue because we're only getting that surface area. For fructose and glucose, you can see that their edges are a little bit more jagged. And so this is really beneficial for them if you want to reduce your sugar crystallization. For instance, you don't want to have grainy candy, say. Then this will help with that because it will hold in that moisture a little bit more. The moisture will bind to these molecules. So it also enhances flavor because flavor molecules are much smaller than these sugars are. And the flavor molecules will actually bind to the sugar. This happens with sucrose as well, but not as easily as it does with the fructose and glucose. Oh, backwards. Oops. Okay. So just a little bit more on the chemistry. I'm almost done with that side of it. So in chemistry, a solution is a mixture where a substance is completely dissolved in a liquid. So maple syrup is a solution of sugar dissolved in water. So the solution is sugar plus water there. For saturation, a water solution cannot dissolve an infinite amount of sugar. So if you go above that 68.9% bricks, for instance, all of that sugar won't be able to be dissolved. If you have 90% bricks, all that sugar isn't going to stay in that barrel of, or that container of maple syrup. So saturation is the point where no more sugar is going to dissolve. And the saturation point increases with temperature. So what do we mean by this? All right. So we have temperature here, and we have grams of sucrose dissolved. So if you notice when you're heating up syrup, if you're making any type of confection, you notice that the any of the sugar crystals that are in there will end up staying in liquid form. You won't see any of the sugar crystals when you're heating up that solution. But when you cool that solution, say it's late at night and you want to get some sleep. So you cool that solution, you come back the next day and you notice there are sugar crystals in that container. That's because as you're lowering your temperature, the grams of sucrose that can dissolve in water are lower. So a solution that is saturated at higher temperatures, so up here, becomes super saturated as it cools. So super saturated just means that it has more dissolved sugar than it can hold. And supersaturation is an unstable state. So why am I even talking about this? Why is this important? Well, because if you have too high of density in any of your confections, you're going to end up with more of the crystals than what you actually want. For instance, with syrup, this syrup probably has about 70 bricks. And so because of that, those crystals ended up appearing. It's beautiful, but sometimes it's not ideal, especially if we're selling in a grocery store or at a farmer's market. For family, just for friends, yeah, it's beautiful. But so most traditional maple confections are crystals. And so their temperature that you're cooking to matters very much. Specific cooking temperatures have been identified for these different confections, and we're going to call them finishing temperatures. We express them in terms of boiling point of water. Okay, this is, I believe, the last figure that we'll look at today, but I think this one is pretty important. So boiling temperature corresponds with water content. So before we were talking about, all right, well, you're going to cool your syrup and you're going to end up with crystals on the outside of the syrup because the syrup is leaving that solution. Well, in this situation, we actually want those sugar crystals to be out of that solution. We don't want a lot of water anymore. We want to use those sugar crystals and make them do exactly what we want to do. And so what do we want to do with them? We want to make cream, candy, or sugar. So for syrup, let's look at our water contents first. Syrup, it's 31 to 33% water. If we look at cream, 15 to 18%, candy is less than that, and sugar is 6 to 7.5%. So now we look at boiling temperature. All right, well, we all know syrup boils at about 219, 220, or I think it's 7 degrees above the boiling point of water. Maybe it's 7.3. I'm not in the evaporator room very often, so please forgive me if that's incorrect. So your boiling temperature for syrup is about 219, 220. When you're making cream, you want to go up to about 234 to 237. So the reason that we're saying these particular temperatures is because we want to get a specific water content, because that's what's really important. So these numbers are based on where I am, which is at 1,000 feet in elevation. So these numbers might change for you. If you look at any of our written documents, they will say 22 Fahrenheit above the boiling point of water. And so that's something that's very important, that you know what your boiling temperature is. If you're making candy, you're boiling it to a little bit higher to get that water content that you want, and same with sugar. So as I just mentioned, there are boiling point adjustments. So the boiling point of water varies based on your elevation and atmospheric pressure. Elevation being the most important of those two. So a general rule is that for each 1,000 feet in elevation, there's a decrease of about 2 degrees Fahrenheit in boiling point. So if I'm in Florida and I'm boiling some water, I'm expecting to get 212 degrees Fahrenheit as my boiling point. But since I'm in New York and I'm in 1,000 feet in elevation, the boiling point here is actually 210. So depending on where you are, that's something that you should definitely consider. Also, thermometers have a built-in error. They are not perfect. They are not meant to be perfect. So it's important that you know the thermometers that you're using and you're comfortable with them, and you know if they are finicky, and if so, how you can adjust for that. we end up using digital thermometers for the most part because had the most consistency with them. So it is important to boil water and measure the boiling point each time that you cook your confections. The next thing to look at is stirring temperature and crystal size. So, there we go. Okay, so there we go. The big points from this graph, because I don't think we need to go into the graph very detailed. Larger sugar crystals, if that's what you want. If you want larger sugar crystals, say you're making sugar and you want those large sugar crystals or candy, stir it at a high temperature and stir it slowly. If you want smaller sugar crystals, stir it at a lower temperature and stir it very quickly. So I think one good example for smaller sugar crystals is cream. Some people prefer to have cream that doesn't have detectable crystals in there. And so the way that you do that is you want to you cook your syrup for cream about 234 Fahrenheit. And then you're taking that off of the heat. I just put a lid on it and let it cool overnight. I don't touch it. I make sure it's in a cool enough area, about 50, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Let it cool. I don't touch it. And then whenever I'm ready to make my cream, I will stir it very quickly so that I can get those small sugar crystals. Let's see. So the intensity in which you're stirring will also impact your crystal size. So as we just said, the faster, more powerful that you stir, the smaller the sugar crystal will be. Also, a gear pump machine, depending on the speed, will usually make a smoother cream than a turntable or candy machine. So a gear pump machine is this machine here. So you have a motor. Oh, you can't see. Sorry, my mouse is on the wrong side. So we have a motor. We have a pump. So the motor hooks to some, I'm not a mechanic, I don't know this very well. So it hooks to some type of apparatus that turns. And then where's the mouse? From what I know. Okay, so the cream is going to pump up, down through this top lid. It's actually a cone, and it'll pump in a cyclic manner. So until the cream is ready to be deposited into its jars. So this is very good because it's a smooth, consistent speed, and none of the cream is building up on the sides. Now, if you're making cream in a turntable machine, then you're going to end up getting buildup. You're not going to have a very even stirring. And so because of that, your cream might not be as smooth. I have talked to producers who make cream out of these machines, and they have had success. So both options are available, but those are the issues that you may have if you do use the turntable machine. So a consistent quality maple confections depends on the invert levels, that finishing temperature or how much water content you have, the stirring temperature, and then the stirring speed. So let's get into the recipes because I think those are the most fun. So first for maple cream. So this is the one that had the lowest temperature that we boiled to, has the highest water content of these traditional confections. So first we want to select a syrup. We want low invert syrup because we do want some moisture in the cream, but not too much. So 0.5 to 3% is the recommended amount. We're going to heat our syrup to the designated temperature. Then, as I said, place a lid on the pot and just allow it to cool completely undisturbed overnight. And the reason I'm saying undisturbed is because if you jolt it at all as it's cooling, then remember supersaturation. So those sugar crystals are going to come out of solution. Now, in this case, if you don't disturb it, then your solution is going to freeze. So your sugar crystals are in there, but they are so frozen. How do I say this? There's so little water content that they actually can't move at all. So they're stuck, they can't move. But the moment that you have a dust particle fall on top of the syrup or there's a jolting, then you're going to end up having all of these sugar crystals form on top of your supersaturated solution. So you can stir your cream multiple different ways. You can do it by hand or using a KitchenAid mixer. I would always recommend using the Pro mixer just because the motor is stronger and you won't have to worry about it breaking in the middle of it. One other really interesting, I would say, hand method that I recently heard is using one of the immersion blenders. And so it seems to work quite well since you can control it really well. So by hand, using a KitchenAid mixer or immersion blender, you can also use the Sipple machine. With this Sipple machine, it's called a pig, is actually detachable. So this unit that would carry the syrup is detachable, and you can actually heat it up on the stovetop or whatever type of heating unit you're using, and then let it cool there. And then you don't have to worry about as much loss as may happen in the other machines. The third machine is the turntable one. And then the last one is a water jacketed cream machine or gear pump machine. Then you can dry your creams and store in refrigerated conditions. If you want to have shelf-stable cream, we do have a protocol for that. Pretty much it's adding a food additive called potassium sorbate, and that's to prevent against mold growth, which is the only concern that you have with maple cream spoilage. One other point when making maple cream is that you can add seed crystals. So you add sugar crystals that are an ideal size onto the crystallized solution. And so the crystals in the seed or in this white cream, the cream that was already added to my undisturbed sugar or undisturbed supersaturated solution, that seed will initiate the crystallization reaction. So the trick to this, you have a good batch of cream, save one of your jars. You just need, actually, they recommend 5% of the solution, but really, I've done this with 2 gallons, I've done this with 5 gallons, and I end up using about a tablespoon of the cream, maybe 2 tablespoons. Just 1 tablespoon, sorry. And you'll be able to start that seeding reaction or starting all those crystals of the ideal size for me. Now, even though you've added this seed, you still have to stir it at the appropriate speed in order to get that seed distributed and get all those sugar crystals to be of that ideal size. If you don't seed, sometimes you can end up getting really heavy crystals or big crystals in your cream. So this is what one of our batches looks like. You can just see those crystals. Of course, you could taste them. The cream was dry. It was just not a good quality. So let's take a look at candy. So for maple candy, so we're cooking that one to a higher temperature, right? And we want candy to be pretty firm. We want some sugar crystals in there, and we don't want too much moisture. So let's focus on the moisture part. We don't want a lot of moisture, which is part of why we want to have lower invert levels. So this is compared to the maple candy where we could have up to 3% invert. So for cream, you could have up to 3% invert. So for candy, we're going to heat the syrup a bit higher, and then we're actually going to cool it to a very specific temperature range. You can go for softer candy, you can cool it to 150 to 160. And for harder candy, you can cool it to 175 to 200. Now you can stir that by hand. You can use the same machines. You can use the Sipple. You can use the water jacketed machine. You can use the gear pump machine or the water jacketed machine. So the other part, in addition to letting it cool to the specific temperatures or the specific temperature ranges, is when you deposit the candy. So I know that I have tried to make candy in a KitchenAid mixer, and I was pouring out my candy into the molds, and I wasn't doing it quick enough. And so the candy ended up hardening while I was pouring it. So one way around that is to deposit it at a higher temperature. So deposit it at around 175 if you're stirring by hand. And if you have one of these machines, then you can actually go ahead and deposit it at a lower temperature. And the reason why is because the candy is still turning or is still moving in that machine as you're depositing. Whereas with the hand method, you're not able to deposit and stir at the same time. Then you can allow your candy to cool in the molds for about 20 to 45 minutes, and then go into crystal coating. The last confection that we're going to look at, as far as the traditional, is, well, the last one available, so maple sugar. For sugar, you need to select a syrup and measure the invert level. Sugar is a little bit more forgiving with the invert level that you choose. I've been able to make sugar up to 5.5% invert. However, I do end up getting some fudge-like consistency that I have to kind of cut with my spatula and then dry, and so that's a bit of a longer process. So if you want sugar that's these smaller granules, a lot of it's very smooth, you can use lower invert. But if you are willing to go through that extra time, you'll get bigger sugar crystals that can continue to be broken up. You will be rewarded with a more intense sugar flavor. So that one's really a preference on whatever you want to do there. But when you're heating your syrup for sugar, you can actually go between 50 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit above the boiling point of water. And so that's quite a big range. So 50 Fahrenheit would be really good if you want that soft, a little bit moist candy or sugar, sorry. And 70 Fahrenheit is more if you want a really dry sugar. It is important to brush down the sides of your pot or your whatever type of heating vessel that you're using with a wetted silicone brush. And this will just help to prevent sugar crystals from forming there. And then once you reach temperature, we're actually going to stir it immediately. The lowest temperature I would recommend stirring it is when it gets to 200 Fahrenheit, because when you're taking your sugar off of the heat, it's still in liquid form. And so it needs to be nucleated. So there's no sugar crystals formed. And so as soon as you start stirring it, you're going to get those sugar crystals. So I would recommend stirring it at a higher temperature, because otherwise you're going to get it too cool and it'll end up forming a solid mass, or just a sticky mess, and there's not much you can do with it. So important thing for sugar, stir it right after it's taken off of the heat. You can stir this by hand, with a stand mixer or a turntable machine. I'd recommend that before you store your sugar in whatever containers you've chosen, that you should let it air dry. Right now, I think we're at about 50 degrees Fahrenheit here. I have some sugar cooling in the kitchen. It takes about 30 minutes. And then I touch the sugar, make sure that it's cool, and then I'm able to put it in the container. So the other thing that if you can control is a low humidity environment. So if you're cooking confections in the same room all day long, then you don't want to let your confections, candy, or sugar cool in those rooms, because it's just there's too much water in the atmosphere or in the air. And then store it in an airtight, high moisture barrier packaging. We actually use those ball mason jars in the lab because they're wonderful. They work really well. But if you're sending any of your or selling any of your sugar, the only thing that I would recommend is not using cellophane, just because cellophane is very breathable. It's good for candy, but it's not good for sugar because it'll end up clumping up and getting too much moisture. So if you end up having too high of invert level in your syrup, then you can still use that syrup for these confections, but you have to take some considerations for that. So if your invert levels are above the recommendations, you can adjust by increasing the finishing temperature. So getting rid of a little bit more of that moisture or that water, so that you don't have to worry about that water being there in the confections, because those invert sugars have already bound up the water that would normally be there if you hadn't had them. So one example of this is if you want to make cream, but you have 5% invert syrup. Well, the ideal finishing temperature is the boiling point of water plus 22 or 25 Fahrenheit for those lower invert syrups. So you can adjust the finishing temperature by 1 or 2 degrees higher, so 25 to 26 above the boiling point of water, to allow those sugar crystals to form. So with careful temperature adjustments, you can make robust cream from dark syrup with a smooth texture. And dark syrup is actually what we usually do use for creams, and we do try and hit the limit with the 3% invert levels, because that's the cream that we prefer here. So I am sure we've all had this fun just with making syrup, but also with confections, is that foaming is a pain to deal with. Defoamer is absolutely wonderful. Just in case it's a little bit new to you, syrups that are heated above 219 Fahrenheit, at least in the confection world, are prone to foam and boil over. Now, I know that you also get foaming when you're making syrup, but I don't know those temperatures. So for foamers, there are 2 options. You can do the conventional defoamer, which is actually liquid or powdered glycerol. And then if you are using an organic foamer, you have to use one that is approved. So that can be canola, safflower oil, or deodorized sunflower oils. So the one just concern, or one thing to raise awareness of with the organic defoamers, is that they aren't as effective, and the reason why is because the oils were not, the purpose of the oils is not to defoam. So you need to be careful with using a low amount of the defoamer if you can help it, if you're using any of the organic ones. One way that you can reduce the amount of defoamer that you'll use is by using a induction oven. We have stovetop induction ovens, and then there's specific pans that you have to get that will match with those, and they will help to even out the heat that's coming on your pan, and you'll get to use a little bit less defoamer than if you're using a stovetop, for instance. So for the conventional defoamers, as I said, there are powder and liquid forms available. They are still both glycerol, even though their names are a little bit different. And I have not worked with the liquid form, but for the powdered form, I usually end up using 5 to 10 granules per gallon. You can use a little bit more if you want to, but I wouldn't use more than 1/8 of a teaspoon for that. All right, so let's dive into the maple beverages. I don't know if any of you guys have tried any maple beverages, but they are my new favorite thing. Also, I drink a lot of them because I work with them. So we've developed quite a few beverages here in the Cornell Maple program. We have sodas that are actually being produced by Roxbury Mountain Maple here in New York, a lemon ginger flavor and also a orange flavor. We have different alcohols that are being produced. We have wine, beers. This is actually a maple liqueur, dessert brandy type drink that's quite spectacular. We're working on getting this one onto the market, but if you do want to make it, if you have the ability to distill, this is an excellent beverage. It's called Mapleau, Mappleau. And if you're familiar with Pommeau, it's similar to that. We also have multiple beers in progress. Some of the beers that I think are most interesting right now are our buddy beers. So we're using buddy syrup for the fermentation process, and we've been able to make some orange, and we call them orange buddy beers, and they've been really spectacular. We're playing with a couple different types of beers. I think the next one is a Doppelbock that's on the list. So we collaborate with a couple different brewmasters and breweries on these so that we can test them out and see, how much are people liking these beverages before we present these results to everybody, so that we know that the products we're giving you are good quality. So speaking of sensory tests, this was for one of our sports drinks. We made a maple cherry and a maple tangerine. And these are all actually Cornell cross country and track athletes. They had run, I think, 6 miles that day. And as soon as they came back from their run, we had the table set out and we let them taste the beverages and they told us what they thought. Long story short, the cherry was liked by about 70% of the runners, but the tangerine was liked by, I think it was 86 or 88% of the runners. So it's a balance, being able to get complementary flavors. We really were hoping that cherry would work well, but it's a little bit too tart. We didn't want to add too much sweetness from the maple. So the point of this is there are a lot of different beverages that can be made using maple. And our job is to be able to troubleshoot those to find the right balance of maple flavor and whatever those other complementary flavors are. So you can use sap for making maple water, or it can be used as a base for fermentation products. Personally, I would go with maple water. We're working on a couple different recipes for using maple sap right now, but pretty much what it is you'll take maple sap from the tree, you'll do a process called acidification, which is just adding a particular acid. We use lactic acid because it doesn't impart much flavor. So you take sap, you have lactic acid, and you add a set amount of lactic acid to that sap until the pH is below 4.2. And then you heat it up to 180, hold it for 5 minutes, and then bottle it. And that's it. And you have bottled maple sap. And that's our base recipe. But there are also ways that you can carbonate it and sell it as a shelf-stable beverage. Or we actually made the maple tangerine sports drink from maple sap also. So that was a big hit. And there are so many different flavors that you can look at. You can use fruit concentrates, which has been one of my favorite things as far as flavor goes, but you can also use flavorants. So sap, as it's a product on its own, has a lot of potential, especially with maple water. For using it as a base in fermentation products, it really depends on if you want to use these. You're really not using a lot of sugar when you're doing your fermentations. And you're also not getting that flavor in the final product. So you can use water and regular granulated sugar from the grocery store, or you can use sap. That one's a preference. But of course, syrup is used as a sweetener, a carbohydrate source, and a water source. So for the sports drink in particular, it was our main carbohydrate source. One of the products I didn't really mention before was a sports gel that's used by ultra marathon runners, and it is actually just maple syrup that is in these squeeze pouches that ultra marathon runners use. Also, I think kids use them nowadays. I think they have like applesauce or something in them. But anyway, it's a really wonderful carbohydrate source for runners, which is part of why we really went that route. But syrup can also be used as a source of water, and just multiple different beverages are able to be made with it. So one of the things when we're looking at these different beverages and how to make them and whatnot is, how successful will they be? Is it even worth your time to make a sports beverage? Or is it completely out of interest for consumers? So we take a look at the market projections. So for instance, from 2019 to 2024, there's an expected annual growth rate, excuse me, of 6.2%. So this is for energy drinks in North America. So I think there's a lot of potential for sports drinks, but also all the products that we have will have this type of information available. And I'd already mentioned this. So say you wanted to sell your maple sap as a tangerine sports drink. What it would entail is you do need some maple syrup. You need tangerine juice concentrate, some glycerol, and that's part of the benefits to the runners. It actually helps to hydrate them a little bit more. Malic acid is for flavor. Potassium chloride is an electrolyte, and then sodium citrate is an electrolyte. And then, sorry, I didn't include the maple sap in here, but you have all of your ingredients and what that cost would be to produce that for each 24 ounces. So it'll cost you 70 cents to make maple water sports drink per 24 ounce. And then you can have a retail price of $2.19 and up to $3.99. So what if you wanted to stick with confections? I think that's a really great area to go to. There are quite a few different options. I already mentioned this one. This is the sports gel. There are marshmallows, dehydrated marshmallows, maple chocolates, ice cream, cotton candy. You have sugars that are more intensified, or any of the products with buddy syrup. We have a group of students working on a maple hazelnut spread and a maple marshmallow spread, or marshmallow fluff, right now. So there are a lot of different options with confections in addition to beverages. So for confections, the syrup, it's of course used as a sweetener. We want the sweetness in our confections, but also it helps with structure. And it helps to hold the water moisture content like we talked about with those invert sugars. There are multiple confections that can be made, traditional and newer ones. So if you're making something like marshmallows, you're gonna heat up your syrup with some water and maple sugar. And then in the bowl, you're gonna have melted gelatin, and you're just gonna pour those together and mix it for about 10 to 12 minutes. Wait for about 5 hours, and you're left with a beautiful maple marshmallow. We have worked on this recipe quite a bit so that you have a good shelf life in your marshmallow. We even recommend, if you're making this in the summer, then you can tweak the recipe a little bit. If you're making it in the winter when it's a lot colder, lower humidity, you can tweak it this way a little bit. So we really want to provide these recipes as perfect as they can be. We also made a powdered maple sugar with for this recipe, and it's pretty much, it's just grinding maple sugar. You can do it in a blender, a coffee grinder. Really, we also use a melanger, which is used for chocolates, but really any way that you want to blend the sugar to make it smaller, it's definitely worth a try. It tastes pretty good. So if you want to make dehydrated marshmallows, the recipe is a little bit different. Spoiler alert, it has less invert sugars than the regular marshmallows, because the regular marshmallows can handle that moisture, and these dehydrated marshmallows will become absolutely sticky if we use that same amount as the fresh marshmallows. But once you follow the dehydrated marshmallow recipe, you're going to dehydrate your marshmallows for 4 hours at 120 to 130. You can do this in a dehydrator or in an oven. This dehydrator was about $30. We got it at Walmart. And then one thing to note is that marshmallows will expand in size, about 10 to 25%. So cut them as small as possible. And you'll still end up with these beautiful, very flavorful. They're full of maple flavor marshmallows. And these will have a shelf life of, right now we've only been able to say for about a year. But if it's held in the right storage conditions, then it could have a longer shelf life than that. So say you do want to make maple marshmallows. Well, you have your gelatin sheets. That's only about 28 cents. Your syrup, your invertase, or a way to invert that syrup. And then salt, we didn't count because it's such a small amount. So per 4 ounce, or 113 grams, it costs you $1.60 to make fresh maple marshmallows. And maple marshmallows, the gourmet maple marshmallow market is very trendy or very hot right now. So the retail price for fresh or gourmet marshmallows is $7.14. This is the average. So you can go a little lower or a little bit higher. Now, if you're using dehydrated marshmallows, because they end up inflating so much in size when you dehydrate them, the cost to produce them is insanely low, 10 cents per 3 ounces or 85 grams. And I'm saying these different numbers based on what the average size of how these are sold. So fresh marshmallows are like an average of, they're most commonly sold as 4 ounces, and dehydrated marshmallows are most commonly sold as 3 ounces. And so these dehydrated marshmallows retail for $4.23 and up to $5. So if you want to know more about value-added products, we just updated our New York State Maple Confections notebook. And if you are in New York State, you can look at the Get Started Value-Added Products. But if you're not in New York State, you can still look at this document, but you will need to skip point number 3, which is, I guess I should go through these. Sorry about that. So getting started value-added products, you start with, all right, you want to sell a food or beverage. Where do you start? What is the first step? Then, where is that food or beverage going to be produced? Where are you going to make it? In your own facility, in your house, or are you going to rent a facility? And then you need to see, do you need to register your facility with whatever your state department is? So it just depends. Your state department will be able to walk you through that if you're not in New York. But if you are in New York, then we have this information available. Do you need to register your facility with the FDA? And then this very common term going around, what are current good manufacturing practices? So if you want to take a look at those items, please visit our website. And then just thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to any questions you guys have. Oh, sorry, I can't hear you.
I said, thank you so much. Sorry, I was on mute. I know there's so many people that are super interested in this because there's a lot of money to be made in it, and it's difficult. So I know there's a lot of interest in it. We really appreciate you coming out. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and then we can work through those. I am going to put up the poll, and that way we can have something to do while we wait for any questions that we may have. It looks like we have a question there, Catherine.
Let's see. When cooking down the maple sugar, brush with a wetted brush. Wetted with what? With water. Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I should have clarified that before. Yeah, if you can just wet it with water, since the water is going to just go directly into the pot and then be re-evaporated, it won't affect the final product at all. I usually just use the silicone brush dipped in a little bowl and then wet around. Maple marshmallows, can you put them in chocolate hot cocoa bombs? Yes, you can. That's a wonderful question and a wonderful idea. Yeah, you can definitely put them in hot cocoa bombs. Although hot cocoa bombs are hard to make. I tried to make them last year, so wishing you the absolute best with that. Oh, someone asked, I'm having a bit of trouble hearing on my phone. Where will this video be posted afterward so I can listen later? Yeah, we're posting that on the YouTube channel that we have here. So okay, perfect. What do you use to measure invert sugar? So there's a video online. If you just want to Google how to measure invert sugar, you'll be able to find it. But really, you just need a glucose meter, and we've always used AccuCheck. So you need a glucose meter, a little bit of water, of course, a little bit of syrup, and a scale, and that's all you need. You're just going to pour a specific amount of syrup, pour a specific amount of water, mix it up, and then you're going to measure it. And then we have charts available online where you can convert whatever that value is on your glucose meter to what the percent Imber level is. What confectionery trends lend themselves to maple ingredients? Sorry, do you mind asking the question in another way? I'm not quite sure. Paul.
See if I can get her be able to talk here. Cindy, you're able to talk now if you want to. Well, maybe not.
I'm trying to think. So for
I
confectionery
think that she
trends,
maybe. Oh, there she is. Cindy.
Oh, sorry.
hi.
Yeah. Hi. I know marshmallows is a great example of something that's growing in popularity in confectionery circles. So I wondered, what about I'm not sure, like more organic, utilizing it more with organic chocolates and organic syrup. Do you see that as something that might be coming down the road? Yeah, just didn't know if you knew of anything out there that would make sense.
I personally do not, as far as the organic industry goes. I haven't read up on those trends, but as far as confectionery trends go, one of the most popular routes is with chocolate. It's the most popular among all confections. And then the second is actually gummies. So we have looked at making some maple gummies, but that's a little bit of a delicate process just because that maple flavor in a gummy is a little bit hard. So our way of kind of going around that is making something like a fruit leather. You can use local fruit or any fruit that's just purchased, frozen, it would probably be the best. And making fruit leathers from, or using syrup as the only sweetener there. So that's one option that you can do.
It's a great idea. The other thing, I appreciate you giving us access to the new confectionery guide because it's probably been over 10 years ago. And so the one I think we have on the association website is the old edition. So we'll make sure that we get it updated.
Okay, yeah, definitely go check out the new one. We've got quite a few updates in there. And if you have any questions, send me an email too.
All right, Michael, if you will, my brain forgets things. So if you'll make sure you follow up with me on that, we'll make it happen.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll definitely remind you of that, Cindy. Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, I missed one. Any recommendations to help with preserving sugar candies to prevent mold? So with sugar candies, I'm thinking that you're meaning the molded sugar candies that are in usually in the maple leaf form. So with those, you can dry them out for about 24 hours, and that'll help to prevent mold growth. But one of the things that we really recommend is doing a crystal coating. And so pretty much what that is you're making a supersaturated solution. So you have syrup that I think is heated between, if it's about 160 or 180 Fahrenheit, and then you're actually dipping those dried candies into that syrup. And there are a couple different ways you can do it. Right now, the recommendation is to just leave those candies in that syrup for a couple hours. Sorry, I don't know the number off the top of my head. It is in the confections notebook, but you want to leave the candy in that saturated syrup for a couple of hours. And what's going to happen is you're going to get these sugar crystals all around that candy, and they're going to act as a protective coating. If you think of, I guess the one that comes to mind is if you think of Skittles or M&Ms, they have that coating that's to protect the inner layer. It is actually the exact same thing. For theirs, it's called sugar panning is what it is. But we call it crystal coating in the maple industry, but it's just being able to have that layer of sugar that's going to protect it from any moisture. And moisture is the biggest thing with mold. So since you're protecting it from moisture, you won't have any mold growth. And that'll extend the shelf life from, you could get 1 to 3 weeks if you don't have the crystal coating, but you can get up to a couple of months if you do have that crystal coating. Hope that helps. Yeah, I don't see any other questions.
Yeah, it seems like we're out of questions here, so I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay.